Alright, so this is my little video on active audiences. There's like three things. We've been heading out of the gate of the semester going balls out. And there are three main concepts are all kind of unrelated, and that's really important to keep in mind, right? And kind of tease out how all of these notions are all intertwined. One is media making, right? This is the title of our first text. Today I'm going to talk about active audiences and also the cultural model of communication would be the third, right? Most likely, anytime we're going to talk about the notion of active audiences, we're going to have to consider the cultural model of communication, right? So, active audiences. Remember, there are two main dimensions to active audiences, that there are two facets to the notion. When we talked about agency and we talked about structure, right? These are the two aspects. Regarding agency, there's the quote that there is no necessary correspondence between the intended message and its received meaning, right? So the sender message receiver, the transmission model of communication is chucked out the door. For there's nothing about the message and nothing about the person who encoded it that guarantees its actual reception, guarantees its received meaning, because people are not merely passive, not mere receptacles of meaning. This notion actually flies in the face of a lot of media effects research. Hardline media effects people will say that all you need to do to understand the effect of media is to understand what a message says. This is based on the transmission model of communication, and this, of course, removes real agency from people, but the notion of active audiences problematizes this kind of way of seeing communication and way of understanding how media impact our lives, right? Notion of active audiences sees people as active readers, as active constructors of meaning, as active interpreters, not merely receptacles, but people that actually have agency. It sees that people have power and, in some sense, real sense of autonomy, right, in their use of media, even when you're vegging out in front of the boob tube in alpha mode. Like, there's meaning making occurring there, right? Yeah, because interpretation is not determined. At least interpretation isn't completely determined, not completely, right? And there are some reasons for this that the authors talked about. One is that because meanings are not fixed. We talked about how there are, meanings are multiple. We talked about polysemy and polysemic texts, that there is no such thing as a singular meaning, right? There may be multiple interpretations of any given media text, that multiple meanings, different possible readings of any text. Polysemy and ambiguity can in fact actually be a strategic resource for people who are interested in making media, keeping messages open, keeping meanings open, can be a can be a fruitful strategy in which to facilitate more participation, more identification from your audience, right? The other, another thing to recognize is that about why interpretation isn't determined is that it is in the process of reception that meaning that texts take on meaning, that meaning is ascribed in reception. Receiver drives the system, right? This, of course, this confounds the simple sender message receiver, the transmission model communication. Of course, media producers do create messages, create media programming, and construct messages and meaning in order to get interpreted in a specific way. Media producers, of course, may design and often do design an intended message, but notion of active audiences recognizes that this meaning, the message as intended, is not simply transmitted or dumped into the mind of the viewer, the receiver, right? There are only more or less degrees of correspondence. However, all this talk about agency does not mean that we can interpret anything that we wish. It does not mean that we can construct any meaning at all, where we do not have complete free reign, right? The corollary to agency in the notion of active audiences is structure. Structure being that other facet, that other dimension, right? Karl Marx's famous quote that people make history, but not under conditions of their own making. We can substitute history, the word history, for meaning, right? People make meaning, but not under conditions of their own making, right? We need to take account of the role of structure as well as acknowledge agency, right? Acknowledgement of structure is an acknowledgement of real constraints to interpretation, real constraints to meaning making and to the construction of meaning. Yes, there's agency, but there are constraints. These constraints can also be read and viewed as enablements as well. Structure. Structure shapes meaning, right? Specifically, the authors identified some structural characteristics or aspects, right? One being that patterns of interpretation, structures and shapes meaning, but also social location, like class or age or race, ethnicity, sexuality, ideology. All of these provide the viewer, provide us, provide audiences with cultural tools. These are the cultural tools for encoding and decoding for text, right? Therefore, we can see structure as a mediator of meaning, not a determiner of meaning, but a mediator. Structure mediates. Structure mediates meaning. Structure mediates meaning of media, right? So 2 levels of mediation going on there, right? Again, think about the cultural model of communication, right? So we're all born into shared maps of understanding. to shared vocabularies, and these limit our possibilities for media making. But on the other side, these possibilities also emerge out of the shared social map of meaning, right? Could also say that new media change the conditions that are around us. New media change the conditions of communication. You could say that these structure the possibilities of communication, but they do not determine, right? Yeah. So, how is it that meaning is something that can be constructed? Meaning is something that is constructed in structure. The structure, you talk about the structure of meaning.